Welcome to the next edition of Leadership Lessons from High Seas, where I've been sharing a lot of my examples of working on ships and how they are relevant to corporate workplace. Now, when I was sailing on ships, one of the key jobs was to plan a voyage. How do we take a ship from point A to point B? And one of the things was planning the entry of the ship into a narrow passage, a narrow area. That's a very critical leg of a voyage. It could be a narrow river, narrow channel you're entering, because once you enter the channel, you cannot come out. So it's a very, very critical maneuver you take. Now, when you're planning that leg of that voyage, one of the things we used to do was mark something called an abort point on the chart. Abort point used to be a point beyond which, if the ship crosses that point, then it does not have enough sea room or width to turn back. So after that, you have to proceed to your voyage. This would especially happen when you are entering a very narrow channel, entering a very narrow river. And if you cross a certain point, the river or the channel may not be wide enough or may not have enough depth to aid the turning. So from that point, once you cross that, you cannot abort that voyage. It was a very, very critical point to mark on the chart. And for not just a point of transit, but also an important decision point. Because once you cross it, you cannot come back. Now, this concept of abort point is also very relevant to workplace, especially when you are leading a change or driving a new initiative or a new project. Now, what happens when you are driving a project? Sometimes you get too attached to it. You make it your personal agenda, especially if it is something which you're very passionate about, something which you've been working for some time now. It's been work in progress for a long time, and it finally sees the light of the day. You get too attached to it. Now, there's nothing wrong in that, but what happens if things don't go the way you wanted to? Things don't go well as per plan. That is where, if you're too passionate, too attached to a project or an initiative, you find it difficult to let go. You find it difficult to abort because it hurts your pride, it hurts your ego. You make it as a personal issue, right? Now, a lot of organizations are very good in project management. Point very clearly identified. Now, abort point has three main aspects. One is being aware when to abort. The second is actually taking that decision to abort, and the third is really dealing with the after effects. When you have to abandon something in between, how do you deal with that? Now, knowing when to abort is not easy, right? I gave an example of what we do in a navigation chart, and there it is relatively easier because you can easily identify that point. But in real life, the workplace is so dynamic. It requires a great degree of situational awareness and contextual awareness for you as a leader to really identify, okay, this is the time I should abort the project or the mission. It means that you have to be truly aligned to the feedback you're receiving on the ground, to the pulse and feel of what people are telling you. Sometimes you could also plan for it in advance, right? Before you start something or during the project run, you can actually think that if certain conditions are not met, I'm not going to go ahead with it. Because a lot of leaders, despite the signal, they still push projects ahead. Sometimes it is a prestige issue, sometimes because of the investments they've already made. So they find it very difficult to abort. They find it very difficult to let go. So being aware of when to abort is critical. The second thing is actually taking the decision to abort something in between. Now, that's not an easy decision. It's a very tough call to take because it will hurt your pride, it will hurt your ego, and sometimes it may even hurt your credibility and reputation in the organization. But knowing that this is the right thing for the organization, the right thing when you think about the bigger picture, that's where you have to take the tough call that no, we are not going to go ahead with, we're going to abort it. And the third is dealing what happens after that, right? Because as I said, it might hurt your pride. So it involves a lot of humility, right? Accepting it, acknowledging it, owning it up, and saying this, yes, I am accountable for this. I take full responsibility and ownership of this, and then sort of learn what were the learnings from that experience, right? And how do you ensure that when you run a project next time, you take those learnings into account? So that's the whole concept of abort point as a leader, as a leadership practice. When you're driving change, when you're driving initiatives, knowing when to abort something, taking the tough call to abort, and then dealing with the sort of aftermath of having to abort or cut the cord in between. Now, I recognize this is not an easy task, but it's something you have to consciously think about and reflect upon, right? So here's something you can go back and sort of step back and think that if there is any project, any initiative you are running at this point of time, have you clearly identified the abort point? And if not, what are the data points you will use, or what are the parameters you will use to define your abort point in advance? And then, if and when, unfortunately, that point comes, how will you step up to actually take that call to abort that project in between? So I hope you find this useful. Do share your feedback and comments, especially if you had an experience in the past of aborting a mission, and how did it make you feel? How did you handle it? Would be great to hear your thoughts and comments. That's all from my side. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy, stay indoors as much as possible, and see you on the other side. Thank you.